Namaste and welcome to my show. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today we have with us Arshia Malik, a skeptic woman from a Muslim heritage background and who comes from a conflict zone of Jammu and Kashmir. So, Arshia ji, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhinavji, for calling me. And that's a very apt description. Thank you.
Welcome. So, before we start, give us something about your background of your growing up in the conflict zone of Kashmir. How did it shape your thinking, your perception of the world, and your understanding? And as you say, you don't you are a heretic Muslim as you describe yourself. So, what does that mean?
Uh, my formative years were basically spent in New Delhi. My dad was posted in the Kashmir house, Chanakyapuri, and I've grown up in the diplomatic enclave. And this is the 80s. So, there's no terrorism or anything as such. And I have had a very cosmopolitan education. There was a Gujarat Bhavan, a Bihar Bhavan in front of Kashmir House. Many people know the Chanakyapuri area. And like my friends, I would have breakfast a Gujarati thali. My lunch would be a Marathi, some dish which a friend had brought in school. And in the evening, since my dad was involved in all these delegations coming and going, so it would probably be an American dinner at the Ashok Hotel. So this is a very cosmopolitan upbringing that I got. Unfortunately, 1984 happened, anti-Sikh riots, and that's the first time I came very close to violence. And my dad was my hero that day, November, and it framed the perspectives that I got. His perspectives, because he was a Kashmiri working in India in a capital, and for many years, and he had built this image about Kashmiri boys, Kashmiri men being very very hardworking, and no less than Mr. L.K. Jha, governor, and Mr. Jagmohan himself praising my dad for being so hardworking. So this is the atmosphere that I've grown in. But 1984, seeing that anti-Sikh riots, I think it broke the idea of India for my father. That's when he decided to move back to Srinagar. So over the years, I've tried to analyze the anti-Sikh riots and what it meant to be, a Sikh in India, or then later the Punjab uprising. My dad was posted in Amritsar. Spent time in Amritsar. I've been to college in Amritsar. So conflict is not new to me. Before the 1989 Kashmir Valley erupted, uh, I was already an independent woman. Uh, in Muslim cultures, there is always this tug between fathers and daughters. I being educated enough to question my religion, that was accommodative. But there's always this conflict going on in a Muslim, especially who's been brought up in Jamaat Islami madrasas and has had this education in Kashmir, and it's really some conditioning that they go through. That India is always the other, and the Hindu is always the infidel, and the Jew is always the enemy. So then, of course, the Shia Sunni thing. I mean, my dad's family would not mix with Shias, and these all things, I witnessed, and I was learning quite the opposite in my schools and colleges. I was learning India as an inclusive country. I had grown up. My friends are from all backgrounds, and this created a conflict in the home, and that's when I started questioning. I mean, my skepticism of Islam started very early. I was 15, I was 14 or 13, and I started reading these books. That's one more thing. Uh, Dad was always, scolded by uncles. Why are you making her read so much? Why do you give her books? Because then she starts questioning. And Dad was torn between, the love for knowledge and वो जो tradition होता है patriarchal setup जो already एक Muslim conservative culture में होता है. So I owe everything to my father, but he was not really proud of me. I mean, till the end, he died of leukemia last year. I lost him. We were very close in a sense. A love-hate relationship, but I owe everything to him. The love for books that he put in me. So it was a very, very uh, a moving moment for me to see his idea of India broken in the anti-Sikh riots,
Mhm.
especially with these farmers' agitation going on. It all brought it back. The Red Fort thing brought it all back to me, and
Interesting.
that's.
How much time did you spend in Kashmir? You said you moved back from Delhi to Kashmir, and was it
We
after
moved
89 or before 89?
before 89. We moved back in 1985, and as I believe the muff movement had already started, and stone pelting is something I started witnessing right from 1985. Of course, I live in a place which is a mixture of Kashmiri Pandits, and I mean, they're ancient neighbors there. They've been there for decades. And we have my backyard had a temple piche, and hardly a mosque, one or two mosques around the area. And this is 1985 I'm talking about. Of course, there are missionary schools in the valley. There was no DPS or anything or any other national school there, no CBSE curriculum. So we've grown up with a very you would say secular outlook because of these missionary schools. There used to be only four missionary schools. So naturally, I'm a product of missionary schools only. And these missionary schools, when you have all these, they had taken teachers from all over the states. I remember, I had English teachers from the south, I had maths teachers from the east, I had the all backgrounds, and they were living in the valley, quite safe, very secular fabric, except once in a while when there used to be a cricket match, especially a very famous cricket match in which the West Indies had come to play in Srinagar, in the only cricket stadium that we have. And that's when I started understanding, when I think Pakistan had won the match, and there was this. I think India had lost it to the West Indies, and the West Indies were flabbergasted to see the support in Srinagar for them, and they couldn't understand it. Why would Indians be cheering for us? For them, Kashmir was in India. So all those crackers and slogans, and that's when I first came to understand the writing that takes place in front of Kashmiri Pandit homes for no fault of theirs. A stone goes through the window, and then all of us rush to see kya hua. And just because Pakistan had won a match or India had lost a match, and this anti-India, pro-Pakistan feeling, it started to become very evident in the late 80s, 85, 86, 87, the election that was rigged, the famous election that was rigged, and the boys started crossing over, and we started hearing cousins disappearing and young boys disappearing. So it all started then,
What you are
and then
saying,
finally 1989 erupted, totally erupted.
what you're telling is very interesting because this is a story we don't hear. Because normally in the normal or the mainstream discourse in India, we have been told that it's after 1890, sorry, 1987, after the elections were rigged, that they sparked insurgency and radicalization. But what you're saying, the radicalization was already there, and all those attacks and stone pelting were going on even in the early 80s or mid 80s.
I wouldn't call the 80s and the 70s and the 60s attitude of Kashmiris towards outsiders as radicalization. It's something that was normal for us. In school, the Kashmiri Pandits, there is this derogatory thing that some of the students used to use for my friends, which I've heard, and I understand Kashmiri very well, was Dalibat. Dalibat in the sense is because the Kashmiri Pandits are non-veg mostly, I mean, they eat dal, and in Kashmiri Muslim households, the dal is more like कि अगर कोई बीमार है तो दाल बनती है. You're actually asked कि सब कुछ ठीक है, why are you eating dal? It's like that because it's all a mutton-based thing. Uh, I wouldn't call it radicalism. It's the underlying discrimination that is always there in all societies. You see them as the other, different. For example, me, why I was at a very unique position to understand this discriminatory or prejudice or bias because I am dark skinned. I have inherited this from my grandmother and my father, this dusky complexion. But in the 80s, I was subjected to this racism that Kashmiris do not acknowledge. They have this pride about fair skin, blue eyes, and all those blonde looks, which they eventually relate to Arabic or Turkish descent. For them, we are more like they have this derogatory term now in the modern times in social media. They have Indian, Indian. It's the END. So I'm very proud of my Indian features, but I faced a lot of racism even through my cousins. I mean,
Mhm.
very derogatory terms, very derogatory terms. It's like Kashmiri word kala vataj. Now, vataj is your sweeper, the lowest caste. So you can understand the caste system is there in Kashmir as well.
Mhm.
The lower castes, they do all the menial work, sweepers and karamchari, safai karamcharis basically. And for them, any dark skinned person is equal to that. So there is a full vocabulary lingo in Kashmiri language,
Mhm.
and I've been hearing that for most of my childhood. My mother used to get upset, and that's what I would hear. And for me, it was very strange. I mean, she's fair complexion. She's very from my grandmother's side, very Afghan features. If you remember Sharbat Gul, the famous iconic image. So, and then me completely different. So I was in a unique position to understand this. People used to assume I'm from the south. So when you sit in the matador, matador is the bus that you go to work or school for, and you had a Kashmiri Sikh or a Kashmiri Pandit sitting next to you, and the boys in the bus would usually start, all those things that I speak about, not knowing that I understand Kashmiri. And it was only when the abuse or the molestation or the Kashmiris have this thing. There's a lot of pervertness in the buses. So when it used to go cross the line, and I would open my mouth, and that's when they would be stuck back. Oh, you understand Kashmiri. So I've been in this unique position to understand कि वो जो politically correct बनते हैं social media पे, living rooms में actually वो क्या समझते हैं about Shias, about Pandits, about Indians generally, about every Indian is called a Bihar. Bihar is a very derogatory thing for them. It doesn't now only mean somebody from Bihar. It means backward, black, lower caste.
Mhm.
So it was very early. I've been subjected to. I mean, it's taken me a while to understand this. I'm still trying to understand.
Something very interesting. You are basically talking about the things we never hear, that the inbuilt racism in the society, which is never confronted, inbuilt casteism, and religious bigotry. So, racism. I mean, you just talked about that, but what about the casteism? Because they always, so you see these pro Azadi people, or who are pro Pakistan people, they always come say, well, India is a a casteist place, and we Muslims don't have caste. We are superior. We are egalitarian. What is the caste in Jammu and Kashmir, and let's say especially the Kashmir Valley? How do they treat the, let's say, the tribals, the Guzars, or how do they treat, as you say, the sweepers and the others who do not part of that Kashmiri culture?
Uh, this is something that the Kashmiri society never reflects on. There is never any reflection. I mean, I since I started writing, I wanted to put a mirror to that. Ulta, I faced a lot of smear campaigns and everything. See, we hire these guzars and bakarwals in most of the elite homes. They cut down the trees in the orchard and get ready for spring and all things. They are treated very well, nothing like that. But there is this distance.
Hmm.
Like I have had Khan Baba in my family. My family is from the elite background, and Khan Papa used to come and he would chop down all the trees and everything. And I noticed my mother keeping a separate plate and a separate glass for him, and strict instructions कि तुम ये नहीं करोगी, because I was the one who was always rebellious. And I was like, why can't he drink in my cup? So this is there. He may be treated. I mean, they're generally given work in the mosques for firing up the heating system in winters. They're given clothes, everything. It's nothing openly, but there is this discrimination. Yes, he will not sit inside and eat. He will sit on the steps and eat. So these small things are
Steps
there.
of the mosque, or
Then
you are talking about the home?
homes.
Okay.
They won't be brought inside, and every home has a kind of a patio, and they will sit on the steps and not allowed to come in. And every Kashmiri house has a washroom outside, so he will wash his hands outside, not called in. Uh, this is there. Of course, the younger generation now is rebelling against it. A lot of my cousins, my friends, and all. But this is the 80s I've grown up in. So for
Hmm.
me, it was blatant, discrimination. ऐसे करके you're saying something else, you portray something else, and ये वो ज़माना है when there was no social media, or we had that one single TV channel DD, no cable television, simple landline, and those trunk calls. So this is that time, and obviously we don't have any recorded, things for this. We hardly made any movies then in Kashmiri cinema. So this is something which is everybody has witnessed it, but they won't talk about it because then you're showing a mirror to society. Then of course there is this discrimination about like I said, the Safai Karmacharis and all that. There is discriminations about the people who stay in houseboats. They're called Hanjis.
Huh.
They are seen very. They might be, they're wonderful people, very hospitable and all that. But in society, when you're sitting in social life and all, everybody's background, जैसे कि आपकी जात क्या है? So they will be asked. They want to find out what is the background. Is he a Hanji? Is he a Syed? Is he a Bhatt? Is he what? What is
Which is
he?
actually a caste, right? Which is actually caste system
This
ultimately, that
is
your
this is
birth
caste.
lineage. Yeah.
Very rarely that marriages happen across. Very rarely. It's always a rebellious couple that has gone over the family. And uh, the society is mostly about elites. People change their castes even. They might feel that they are lower caste, like the Dars. Dar is a lower caste, and then they suddenly one day might come to being a Sayed, might change it just to have that status in society. At my mother's place where we used to live, there was a doctor, living in we call it a donga. It's kind of like a smaller houseboat. And I remember him coming to see my mother's blood pressure and telling her कि मुझे वो मस्जिद में नमाज पढ़ने नहीं देते हैं because I live in a donga. So for me that was something कि how is it possible? The Sayyids, what they do, or the elites, what they do, or what they portray in society is कि Islam is egalitarian. Safe mein, when you are all standing for namaz, everybody is equal. The king and the pawn. ये सब किताबी बातें रह गई हैं. Reality में ऐसा नहीं होता है.
Hmm.
And I remember attending marriages for which I stopped attending marriages as a protest. I've not attended Kashmiri marriages in decades. The last time I attended was my sister's. Is the same thing. They will keep a separate. We have a trami, a whole big plate in which four people can eat. So you can understand the egalitarian concept of four people eating together, right? Equality, high caste and low caste. But reality में ऐसा नहीं होता है. It's always the four high classes sitting there
Oh.
and eventually sitting at the head of the tent where the carpet is there, and then the lower caste sitting together with their own group of four people but near the shoes. So
Hmm.
I witnessed this, and for me it was for a child वो एकदम hypocrisy समझ जाते हैं. They may not be able to articulate it, but it's understood. It's like that poem My Childhood, by Marcus Nathan, which he recited in the UN, where he's saying where did my childhood go. It's a wonderful poem I teach in class 11, and in which he says कि adults do not always do what they say. They talk about love, but they do not love. So the action and the words completely different. Because I've often had people asking me about Kashmiriyat.
Huh.
It's just a word. It's just a word.
Hmm.
It's just a word.
Mhm. So we are basically saying there's no common Kashmirite which exists because it's highly divided into caste categories. The Kashmiri society, Kashmiri Muslim society.
Caste, caste, class, religious,
Mhm.
lots of divide. Lots of divide.
What about the Shia Sunni divide in Kashmir?
Same thing, same thing. Uh, for me, the Shia discrimination, I was exposed to the Shia discrimination after marriage. I mean, again, derogatory words for the Shia. They are known as Rafiz. Rafiz is a Kashmiri word for the Shia.
What does it
They will
mean?
not eat. Rafiz means Shia, but then it won't be said properly that he's a Shia. It'll be those Rafiz. So there are lots of myths about their religious rituals.
Hmm.
They do the Marsi. The Marsi is done every year for Imam Hussain, and there is this. They have these rumors and myths about them that the Shias, when they do the Marsi, there is a special kind of mud which they rub over it. I mean, basically accusing them of witchcraft. उनके wounds बहुत जल्दी heal हो जाते हैं and other stuff. But I found the Shia society generally, not just Kashmir, but all over, to be very, very educative. They prefer education. They are not so much into superstitions and all. And the Sunnis have these funny things about them. Ki, do not eat in a Shia's home.
Hmm.
They will spit in your food and
It's
don't take
very
that food.
common even in rest of the India. The Sunnis, our Sunni friends used to keep telling us, don't talk to Shias, don't eat in their food.
They pray in a different way, and then the folklore which starts they bury their dead in the graveyard mein aise karke, and then it comes to life. There was this UN survey I had done, and this is very controversial also. I never followed it up, but I did ask my late husband, "Ki, is this true?" And he had a Shia friend and tried to extract information. But for example, in the district of Badgam, it's the smallest district, but it's a predominantly Shia district. So I met these young women. I was doing this UN survey of children affected in armed conflict in 2001, the year 9/11 happened. And I met these 30-year-old women who had five, six children, and they were looking like 50 years old, 60-year-old. They had been married at the age of 15, 14, 16, and aged due to the repeated miscarriages and childbirth and everything. And these were predominantly Shia women. And when you sit among girls and they share these things, and I learned that I don't know if it's true. Some journalists will have to pick it up, but there is this thing in them that they send the bride for the first night to the peer that they have, the head of the locality that they have. Again, not verified, don't know whether it's true, but this is something predominantly there. If it's true, it's a sociological problem. If it's not true, then the Sunnis have created a folklore about them just to keep those that divide there. So
Mhm.
all these things are there.
Interesting.
Class,
These are-
caste, religion, discrimination.
So
It's
this
not
is
as cohesive a society as it's made out to be. There are fissures there. And why would you teach a child that he's a Shia and don't eat it there? Why would you do that? Right? But then if you see the schism in Islam, which has come from centuries,
Mhm.
it's the same thing.
But that's very interesting because we never hear these voices from Kashmir about their people's daily life and their discrimination. Because only narrative about Kashmir is that this Hindu fascist state is killing and suppressing the Muslims in Kashmir. How do you
You
see the
won't
progress and the
you
reality?
won't you won't hear these voices because you would be ostracized. You have to live in that society. Everybody knows everybody. There is no poor in Kashmir. Nobody sleeps on the streets. हर किसी का कोई ना कोई relative है, and everybody is connected in some way or the other. Till the 80s, we used to get married to cousins and all that. It's stopping now, and now that more medical science is coming up, and we've realized that it's a lot of medical diseases happen because of this. A lot of men got educated, and a lot of women got educated, and now it's not done so much. You can go across caste lines, and you can do that. But it's what would you call it? It's a very insulated society. It's insulated because of the mountains geographically, but it's also insulated because I think it's the geographical dilemma that Robert Kaplan talks about in his Revenge of Geography. But for me, it's also the geographical dilemma that the valley has, when you're between mountains, and your whole narrative is there are gatekeepers to it, and the gatekeepers happen to be funded by petrodollars and the ISI. So even if you put facts in front of them, you literally put facts in front of them. Ki Kashmiri is part of the national languages. There is no occupation. ट्रूप्स इतने ज्यादा नहीं हैं जितने आप एग्जैजरेट करते हैं. यूएन रेजोल्यूशंस में जो फर्स्ट स्टेप है वो पाकिस्तान का है. इट हैड टू टेक आउट इट्स ट्रूप्स. बाकी रेजोल्यूशंस मैंडेटरी, दे आर नॉट मैंडेटरी ऑन इंडिया. Unless one is done, two and three, the plebiscite will not happen. So all these things, even if you tell them now that there is social media and internet, 80s it was very difficult to convince somebody, but 90s came bad, and then eventually when the cable came and social media came, it's still very difficult to convince people. They don't want to believe it. For
Mhm.
them, they've been brought up on this anti-India thing. Of course, I'm not statist. I believe the state bungled up many, many times. I've been a witness to the Gurkha massacre also. But then I've also been a witness to a Kashmiri Pandit woman who had simply come for her luggage with her daughter and she was shot dead by the militant. Incidentally, we also knew who the militant was. He was killed in an encounter after a few years. But both things happening, it's eventually the common Kashmiri people who suffered
Hmm. Hmm.
between the state actors and the non state actors.
Hmm. Interesting. So, Kashmir is, is this a problem? I don't think we are going to see a solution anytime soon, but I hope the situation will get better. But coming to other issues, oh,
August 5, let me interrupt you here. August 5 is a partial solution. We
hmm,
needed that.
hmm,
Special status had to be removed because we've grown up with this thing that we are special, and
hmm,
India is never ever going to trouble us, or of course it says it's a toot ang and all that, but then India is always taking care of us, because for 6 months, remember, we are cut off from the mainland, and the government tries its best to send in supplies and everything. So when you tell a Kashmiri ki, but then if you get azadi, आपका वो कट ऑफ हो जाएगा, what will you do? And the typical वो utopian thing कि yes, Pakistan will take care of us, we'll do trade with Iran and we'll do trade with China and all that. Practical, if you ask for a practical, I have asked for a practical plan from the Hurriyat many times. I mean, you pick up their uh, uh, minions and you talk to them and you ask them, okay, even if Azadi, what will you do? What exactly will you do? India agar apna protection hata dega, you've seen it in 47. You had to call in Indian troops, right? So nothing has changed. The geography is still the same. If the Indian
and now,
troops,
now China will
leave,
also take over given the
now
chance.
China will also take over. So what exactly are you going to do? I mean, how are you going to feed the people? We are an agrarian society. We are also dependent on the Indus water, and Indus water treaty ka to ab jaake. There is this wonderful journalist, Mr. Sant Kumar Sharma. He's just written his book Indus Water Treaty pe, and I'm still yet to review it. But it's basically that. I mean, the basic plan of Ghazwa Hind and Operation Gibraltar and everything of Pakistan was waters. You cut off the water supply, what do you get in Kashmir?
Hmm.
I mean, so that's but explaining it to common Kashmiris is very difficult, because 80s mein to already wo tha, that Muslim Ummah thing, which is not radical. It's something you have, there is an affinity to Pakistan.
Hmm.
My dad was fond of Pakistan. When he got a passport, instead of going to any European country, the first thing he did was go to Karachi. It's just something that Kashmiri Muslim boys grow up with. Ki Pakistan jana hai, Pakistani cricket team hai, and it's just something they grow up with. But 90s का जो radicalism है, again, for a common Kashmiri, uh, it's the way it was done. These preachers coming from Deoband groups, and these preachers like Zakir Naik coming on television and on cable, and a lot of my my whole generation was totally Arabized
Hmm.
overnight.
Hmm.
The hijab, the tat from extremist groups, and the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits. It was a pogrom. And contrary to the Jagmohan theory, it went over 2, 3 years, and it's still happening. I mean, it was not like something it happened in one night. The pet Jagmohan theory is that
Hmm.
they made the Pandits leave, and because they wanted to kill the Muslim speeches.
Hmm.
Of
Hmm.
course, massacres happened at that time, but again, as I said, the Indian state did not actually think. It was like a bull in a china shop, and no offense, but they actually had no plan. I mean, the communication which was going from Srinagar to New Delhi was Kashmir is lost, and you better get ready because the border is going to shift to Jammu.
Hmm.
And for us, for pro-Indian people there, Kashmiri Pandits there, that would have been devastating.
Hmm.
So it's very unfair today for people to say, why didn't they pick up arms?
Oh.
They couldn't. I mean, you've never been in a pogrom. You talk about Gujarat so much. एक बार जब terror आ जाता है, and the man of the family sees this terror in his aged and infirm parents, in his sister's eyes, in his wife's and wife and children's eyes. There is no choice. He had to pick up anything that was on their backs and leave. Of course, they went with this thing, they'll be back in a few weeks. Again, the state complicit in that, didn't have open communication. And
Hmm.
but along with the Kashmiri Pandits, there were also secular Muslims. I mean, hit lists used to be put out on electric poles and on the mosque doors, and सीधा जिसको उनको ठोकना था उसके गेट पे, posted that please leave or we'll kill you, that is secular Muslims. Leftists, progressive people, वो जो हमारा जो progressive writers movement था, I mean Kashmir has been a part of that. And uh, agnostic Muslims, they were also targeted, they also had to leave.
But this is very
So
interesting. When we see,
ethnically,
uh-huh.
not just KPs, but Kashmiri Muslims and Kashmiri Sikhs were also targeted.
Yes, so this is something we don't hear, because you see the left in India today, all the progressive voices, all the liberal and the left voices, they romanticize, they support Kashmir Azadi movement, they support Hurriyat, they support militants, they see some kind of revolution out there. And when you are saying that they were the ones who were also killed in the 90s itself, so the Kashmiri leftists and liberals were killed, thrown out, the Kashmiri seculars were silenced, but somehow the seculars, liberals, and the left in the rest of the India still support that very movement which killed them in Kashmir. Why is that?
I've been studying the left movement in all over the world and India also. I am from the old left families. I mean,
Mhm.
my cousin father-in-law was president of the JNK Communist Party, and his legacy is still there. People still respect him. But that's the old left, the old left that used to fight for the underprivileged, the oppressed, and like I said, H.N. Manchu is one of our iconic figures who fought for the Safai Karmacharis and all that. I mean, the left is very respected as such. But slowly, the left seems to have changed, and this is something I've noticed all over the globe. Also, this alliance with Islamists was something which alarmed me, and I started asking. I mean, I respect the left people who've given a lot to the movement, and there are some people I am in touch with, and I keep asking, I keep learning. Why is this? I mean, why don't they understand Islamism? Terror, complete terror. It's complete breakup of India. Why would you do that? And then you start learning about the communist people's support in 1965 to China, and then you start understanding all their, twisted support for things, and then you wonder what is happening. I mean, the left was not all about this, and today it's totally anti-right. I noticed this when the triple talaq movement started, and you give them reasons why it's a good thing. My mother was a victim of triple talaq and all that for 18 years, no maintenance, nothing. I mean, Shabano case, my mother is very, very. It's a related case for me, and I couldn't understand the alliance of the left with them. But when you sit and talk with them, they have no answers.
Mm.
You talk with these stalwart leftists and you ask them, I don't want to name any names, but you start and you tell them, Ki, do you know what the Islamists have done? Do you know what the Sharia actually does? Have you lived under Sharia law? Triple talaq has to be banned. I would love the burqa to be banned, but I'm not, in favor of anything banning. It has to come as a choice. But please, at least ban it for under 11-year-old or 12-year-old, because उनका माइंड तब तक वो सारा उन्होंने ब्रेन वॉश कर दिया होता है. I am all for the UCC. Even the CAA thing, I saw how much disinformation there was. Why would you do this? I mean, you have to support us. I mean, reform in Islam is badly needed. Every day, somebody or the other is killed, for being honor kill, right? There is this huge problem in Islam about honor, being with the woman, and it's sanctioned by religious. It may not be in the text, but or the mullahs have created all these hadith and all that, and
Islamic
every
jurisprudence over
other.
the
Yes,
centuries.
yes. And you have this other problems like justification of that verse of beating, and kitne kitne mohalle mein kitne kitne preachers hote hain, you have these alag alag interpretations, and justification of violence over women. Actually, every time nahi ek wo datun hota hai, utne light twig se marna hai, halke se wo hai, feather se hai, and all justifications ki yes, you can beat a woman. And I've seen that. I mean, my husband, the first time he struck me, and I was like, "You are a university educated person. I have married you because you're educated. I would never have married any Kashmiri, but you're educated, and you can't be like my father." And for him, it was a shock. What had he done? कि इतनी conditioning हमारी है इस religion की कि मैं एक university educated and atheist, a completely evolved person, could hit my wife just because we have a disagreement. So it shocked him the first time. Luckily, he self-corrected, and we had a stormy marriage because I'm very outspoken, but I loved him, and we disagreed a lot, but he self-corrected, and he became a model for other cousins and everything, uh, like
Well,
that.
well
So
that's
this is it, this is it. You have to stand up and question. But I know the toll it takes. I mean, as I said, you don't hear about these things which I'm talking about because you don't want to be ostracized by your community. आप मोहल्ले में निकलते हो and you suddenly somebody will come up, uh, they would come up to my husband and say, your wife is writing all this thing, she's a blogger, and she's writing it in Pakistan and she's saying hijab is not actually empowerment. My hijab article had gone viral, and he came home. He was very proud of me for that article. And he came home and he said, what am I going to answer them? Because for them, it was like, why can't you control your wife? You know, that thing is there. These are educated, university educated journalists, right? They are the ones who are putting out the narrative of Kashmir there. And they troubled my husband a lot, why he couldn't control his wife. That's the basic thing. So इसीलिए आप इसके बारे में नहीं सुनते हैं. इसीलिए this counter narrative hasn't come out. Any
basic censorship.
uh, I have gone through smear campaigns. My right to work was taken away in Kashmir. That's why I don't live in Kashmir any longer, because the pressure started, the threats started, and people would even identify my front door, and they would start telling my father, they would start telling my father-in-law. So you can understand, like I said, I recently wrote an article for the Heartland Analyst, and I said, I was actually scolding the majority. Why can't you give us a break, reformers and liberals? हमें क्यों भारत माता की जय पे आप इतना ये करते हो? There was a controversy in my workplace, and it was about all that. And I have written it's brother against brother. In one home there will be a brother who will be a very liberal Muslim. He'll be very tolerant, and you'll have in the same home, you'll have the other brother or a sister who will be completely Zakir Naik, right? So this is what we're working towards: normalizing dissent, normalizing it. It should be quite normal to question the text, because I'm a firm believer of reason over text. The Mutazilite movement, the heretic traditions that we had in medieval Baghdad, even modern times stuck. And I have discovered wonderful, heretic writers across the Muslim countries. Egypt leads it, of course, and males also, because we can't do it without the men. The men have to become enlightened enough in Islam to understand that dissent is, very important. It's very vital to Islam. Otherwise, in a few decades, few centuries, it will be finished. People in droves are moving away from it. It's an underground movement. And of course, they lead dual lives. They might be showing people that they're Muslim and go to the mosque and everything. But, inside, like what I call the silent majority, they are getting crushed. It's father against sons, mothers against daughters, sisters against brothers, wives against husbands. This ideology, Islamism, is completely dividing these families. The suicide rate is high, and if you go to these, Kashmir has only one mental institution, state hospital for the mentally ill people. And if you talk to the doctors there, which of course they will never record it or they'll speak anonymously about it, and they will tell you maximum are about this only. They're tired of being monitored, whether they're going to the mosque 5 times, whether they've kept the rosa or not, whether they're reading the Quran or not, whether the salwar length is, ankle high, whether the girls are wearing hijab or not. I mean, this morality brigade, this is crushing it, the society from within. And then you keep speaking about the occupation. What about the siege within? Nobody talks about the siege within. It's always about the siege outside.
Well, I studied from JNU, so I always used to tell my comrades in JNU that sitting in JNU and shouting against RSS is not a dissent. Sitting in JNU and speaking against the power structure of the left within the JNU is the real dissent. But this is something which I've seen, Arshia, because in JNU, I would see, and even in my school in Faizabad in UP, we hardly had many Muslim girls studying in the co-ed institutions. And if any Muslim girl would talk in JNU, I'm talking about JNU, if any Muslim girl would talk to a Hindu boy, or let's say having lunch or dinner, you can be sure that the Tabligis and the other boys will approach that girl and say, you shouldn't be talking to that no non-Muslim boy or the thing. I've seen the neighbor in my hostel room. He was a Bengali Muslim boy, and he was a very he came from a typical lower middle class family, and he wanted to be more modern. And I've seen the tabligis would come almost every day and brainwashing, that you have to do roza, you have to do namaz, you have to do this and that. And he would be like, under pressure, he actually started doing that. And he would always give me sheepish smile when I would see him walking around in those pajamas and all those things. But this is, I think, how it works, because somehow we are not talking about these things. Muslim society itself, not just in Kashmir but also across India, is not really talking about this thing. I remember some girl wrote about that the timing for the girl students in AMU library couple of years back. You can go and search the Google News, and she was hounded in AMU as enemy of any. You are demonizing Aligarh Muslim University, and all she wrote was that girls' timings are not good for their studies. In the sense that you have restrictions on the hostels in the library. She just wrote that and published that in the newspaper. That's it. And she was hounded for that. So where do you see this kind of change coming from? Let's say, do you see there are enough young Muslims, both boys and the girls, who are turning heretic Muslim like you, or maybe becoming atheist?
I'll take this opportunity to actually talk to the majority, because at this time it's a very critical juncture for reformists, for Islam, because it's in crisis right now globally. Uh, it would really help if the majority understands what is happening, because at this time I know India is awakening, and it has its own counter narrative to start. And I know there's an anti India narrative from the West as well. A lot of revisionism has to be started. We are discovering all ancient history and medieval history which has been suppressed. I am discovering my state. I had no idea that Panini, the grammarian, or Patanjali had written the Yoga Sutras there, or Abhinav Gupta, the Aristotle of the East. I'm still discovering my own state, which all across these decades I've never ever heard of anything like that. So I'm going to take this opportunity. It's a deadly thing that we are doing. Even questioning the life of the Prophet, even questioning the rightly guided caliphs, anything, any little thing in which we deviate from the official version or the mullah version, it's deadly for us. Please understand this. It's very deadly for us. Like you said, what had the girl written? She hadn't written anything, right? It was normal, something that you. But then, this is it. This is it. You start talking to a non-Muslim. You start reading about these, liberal things. You start posting them, and suddenly they will close ranks. It starts with the men, but the women are also there. So they start closing this rank as if we have attacked Islam somehow, not understanding that there used to be people who would be critical about Islam, and the Prophet had heard of them. He would sit and discuss with them. These are the stories which are also there. And even centuries later, when Islam had been established, I mean, the kings, the sultans, the caliphs used to patronize such thinking. In a court of a caliph, you would have many critical heretics there, actually questioning the caliph, telling him there's something wrong in the text, or telling him there was something wrong with the prophet's decision somehow. And it was absolutely normal. But look at what happened. We had the Rushdie affair. We have had our own H. Farooq, if you remember. His friends had infiltrated that atheist WhatsApp group and had him killed. Avijit Roy, Malala Yousafzai. Of course, Ayan Hirsi Ali was sent a message by murdering Theo Van Gogh, a knife to his chest with a paper telling her she's next. It's so deadly for us. It's already difficult for us. Look at the fight we have had for triple talaq. It's going to be a battle for UCC. So the majority, can it at least give us a break? I mean, not question our loyalty, not, or constantly somebody with a Muslim sounding name He may be a lapsed Muslim. He may be just a cultural Muslim. He may be a skeptic, heretic, agnostic. There are so many kinds of Muslims. Or he may be a believer, right? Can you not just create this atmosphere where we have to first of all prove that we are Indians? Because we have a deadly battle going on. For centuries, the mullahs have been gatekeepers of these narratives and the hadiths and everything, and it's been conditioned for centuries in us that there's going to be no questioning, no rationality, no logic, nothing. They come up with these stupid logic for any question. Like I would ask questions like, okay, Adam and Eve had children, fine, they had two sons. Where did their children come from? This is a completely scientific thing, and they come up with these absurd answers like Hure, utarti thi, God created Hure and all that. Or I would ask them, you keep saying कि अगर किसी को हम दावा करते हैं, दावा in the sense दावत देते हैं to Islam, and if he doesn't accept it, he goes to hell. And in a typical, innocent way, you would ask the people on the Pacific Islands, they are never going to hear about Islam. Are they also going to hell? So a child's logic, no answers for that. Absolutely no answers. Okay, if this man is martyred, he's going to get 72 hoors. Will the women also, if they are martyred, get 72 males? And the mullah saying, Astaghfirullah, what are you talking about? And then complain to my father, she's asking these questions. So this is it, it's so deadly, right? Now, the Hure thing, right? You end up discovering there are so many authors who work with this. Even Western authors, they work very covertly with this. If the Indian Muslims come to know what kind of research is happening in France, there's going to be writing in India. कि वो क्या क्या research कर रहे हैं. Uh, it's been always Western authors who dare to go into that territory and say कि if you read the Quran in the Syria Aramaic version, then it's not Hur, it's Hura. And Hur mistakenly translated into virgins, whereas Hura actually means white grapes, which was the food of the royalty. So exactly like in the Bible, like Jesus used to teach through parables, the prophet might have been teaching through parables, and saying that if you do this deed and you're martyred for it, you will be getting royal food in heaven. Why would you automatically? I mean, it's a mistranslation, I feel, according to one author. So this is also one thing that you can, pick up. But you put it out there, you are going to be targeted. So it's deadly for us already, for reformers, for liberals. The majority can at least give space, at least not question. Uh, I'm not saying pamper them. That would be the bigotry of low expectations. Of course, call them out, call out all, like they have this selective outrage, what I call the Olympics of oppression, कि हमारे साथ ऐसा हुआ था, Babri Masjid is picked up, and this Hashimpura massacre is picked up, and selective things are picked up. Same for Kashmir, Gavkadal is picked up, Handwara is picked up, Sopor is picked up, the Eidgah firing is picked up, but never ever, the Vandhama or Chatti Singhpura. It goes back to the partition. Everybody talks about the Jammu massacre, that the Muslims were obliterated from Jammu. At same time, there was this Mirpur massacre. Nobody talks about it. And it's actually a massacre in which the state head, the prime minister of POK, stood up publicly and apologized to the Hindus. Nobody talks about that. So, there is this selectivism, and the lefts and the liberal is doing it. And we need to understand why. Because it hurt my state a lot. For 30 years, it hurt my state a lot. But post August 2019 nullification, finally the counter narrative has started pushing back. But it's still not safe. It's still not safe. Nobody's going to tell you these things because you keep telling me we don't hear it. It's difficult to speak out. It's very difficult to speak out. So there is a silent majority. I keep saying, I'm not speaking for them, but I'm telling you there is a silent majority which exists. They are very pro-India. They benefit from all the things that Mr. Modi's policies are doing, Mr. Shah's policies are doing, but they will never ever speak openly about it.
Well, okay.
Never.
That's very interesting perspective, and that's, I think, that requires a very wide discussion on itself as to what are the things which are happening post the abrogation of Article 370. But coming to last point, because we're running out of time now. Uh, this entire thing that India has suddenly become intolerant Hindu Rashtra, and somehow Hindus politically asserting themselves is so evil, and Hindu Rashtra is an evil thing. That somehow Muslims can have a Muslim state, Jews can have a Jewish state, the Christians have so many Christian states, Buddhists even have their states. But somehow, if Hindus have a Hindu state, that's somehow the end of the world. How do you see that as someone who comes from a Muslim Kashmiri background, living in the other part of the country? How do you see the rise of Hindutva?
I wrote about it once. For me, it's a laughing matter. It's very amusing that you're protesting on one state which insists on being a Hindu Rashtra, whereas you have 50 plus countries who are Muslim majority, and they don't allow any other religion to flourish there. Now things are changing in the Middle East, but for me, it's very amusing. Uh, See, Muslims don't see their bigotry. Majority Muslims, they will never see their bigotry. Consider yourself in a city post 90s where there used to be a temple, a mosque, and a gurudwara sparsely located. And suddenly, post 90, all these mosques start coming up. All sorts of mosques, Barelvi, Deobandi, and Shia, Sunni, all sects. And there is this azan starting. We have this prayer 5 times a day. And suddenly, one mosque used to start with a loudspeaker, second one with a loudspeaker, and then they realized ki is mosque ka sunai nahi de raha. And the next day, this mosque had brought a even louder loudspeaker. So this whole thing, not realizing that even in that community where you're, building all these mosques, there are non-Muslims there. you know uh, Kashmir doesn't have this concept of cosmopolitan settings or living with other people post 90s. There are
That is
children
true even for the other
whom
part of the
I
country. They blare the loudspeaker from the mosque. They don't care if the non-Muslims are also living there.
isn't it so there is no civic concept on the roads or anything ki there might be non-Muslims walking by. If you have your posters constantly about Islamic seminars happening or this. And I believe that's the same for Indian Muslims as well. They believe it is their right to, pick up any road and start the Friday prayers, whereas it can, disrupt traffic. Of course, there you will find rational imams coming up and saying this is not right. You have a lot of rational Muslims, community leaders, preachers, scholars, intellectual. But वही है उनकी voice कम है. We don't have the numbers. When this I believe this I think this Paris thing had happened, the Paris bombing and all that. uh, uh, for me it was a laughing matter to see the West talking about France and it getting together to ban Islamism or start fighting back for this. And it didn't worry them that this person had beheaded the teacher. The concern was that now the Muslims are going to face discrimination, right? Are it doesn't matter to you that not enough Muslims are calling it out. Not enough Muslims are calling it out. They were calling it out, but not enough Muslims. We don't have the number. There is no mass movement saying that terrorism is wrong. That please stop these 9/11 kind of things. That Usama is bad. That Burhan Bani, absolutely no. You don't have any people coming on the roads and saying this, and that is what we need. We need those numbers. So for I can say it from the perspective of Indian Muslims, why they are so scared about the Hindutva thing and everything. Uh, Firstly, mainstream media exaggerates a lot. I mean, I live in a Hindi belt. I haven't seen any of discrimination against me. I'm living in a secular country. I'm working. Uh, Never has anybody. Yes, I have faced bullying. The kind, goonish kind. Bharat Mata ki jai bolna hai to dikhana padega and everything. For me, that's normal. That's normal. India awakening is not a bad idea. India eventually being a Hindu Rashtra is not a bad idea. I think so. because I've studied Hinduism, and there is a strain of atheist philosophy also, atheist traditions also in Hinduism. The Samkhya philosophy, and those memes coming up, ki whether you believe you're a Hindu or not, you're still a Hindu. ठीक है? And हमारे में, right? If I declare that I'm an apostate, I'll be wajibul qatl. I'll be justified for murder. So that's the difference. Even if India starts going towards a Hindu Rashtra, I don't see any problem with that. I mean, it's pride for your culture and heritage. It has never attacked any country. It has never invaded any country. It has always given refuge to everybody, right from Zoroastrians to Tibetans to Balochis. I see them in the capital. Afghanis live here. We have an old relationship, Kabuliwala and all. It's been a syncretic culture. It's always given refuge to people. I am a refugee in my own country. The KPs are refugees in their own country. Look how tolerant India has been. And then, if it really wants to claim its lost heritage, of Hinduism, which the Arab conquests completely destroyed, the indigenous culture was completely destroyed. I mean, it's not just
More than
Somnath
Arab,
temple.
the Turkish conquest.
Yeah, but considering Turkey is kind of, uh, I'd still say Arab, because Turkey's geography, if you see, and eventually all the history of Turkey, it's still open-minded. That's a discussion for another day. The Turkic Mongols, how ruthless they were, and how ruthless the Arabized people were, and the Arab philosophy coming in, because Kashmir's advent of Islam was from Shah Hamdan, Iran. That's a different thing. It's done very subtly, that you're made to feel bad about all the temple bell and everything, and there are lots of stories and narratives about that. So it's a conquest of a different kind. But yes, mainly through the sword, or mainly through proselytizing and all, the indigenous culture was destroyed. And I think India is rediscovering that. It's the actual discovery of India happening. And it's true, mosques have been built over temples. It's true, you have to acknowledge the fact. Why not get together and start helping the Hindus also to rediscover their heritage? Why not do that? Again, I can go to a temple. Nobody stops me. I've been to a Gurdwara. I can go to churches. I attend mass often. But I have never seen anybody from the non-Muslim background being invited into a mosque. Why does it have to be like that? No, nobody invites it. Look at the controversy which erupts when I think there was this popular journalist who had started celebrating Diwali. I think there was a reporter, or I don't know. I keep reading news about. So this is it. You can't blame a country for claiming its heritage and history, and you are being intolerant yourself, not just about non-Muslims. You're being intolerant about the Muslims within, who are questioning you, who are criticizing you.
Interesting, Arshaji. So now we are out of time, but thank you for your perspective. And first of all, thank you for coming to the show and talking about these things. I'm pretty sure that you will be coming back very soon, because this is a conversation which has to continue. And I'm pretty sure our audience, thanks to you, you must have learned something new in this podcast. And please keep watching us. Thank you.